There's a lot of question and debate on the turnout that actually comes from that. Dating back to 2013, there has been studies and various groups that have looked at the actual impact of early voting, because early voting has been around a lot longer than COVID-19. And so it was with COVID-19 where we really saw an explosion of it. Now, granted, they were looking at more of just the no excuse early voting that other states had, but nonetheless, it still has existed. And even with COVID-19, we see states like Georgia that has shorter early voting timeframes, that has better turnout in relation to the actual registered voters. And so here in Virginia, the 45 days really does not impact, reducing early voting from 45 days to 2 weeks will not have that great of an impact. In fact, it may provide a better opportunity for folks. When you give people a greater amount of time to do something, it gets pushed off, and then sometimes even forgotten. Last year, the comment was made that even if we had one person show up on that very first day of early voting, it was still worth it. Well, Mr. Chairman, I would present to you that if we had 60 days of early voting, somebody would show up on that first day. If we had 90 days of early voting, somebody would show up on that first day. So it's a matter of really looking at the resources that are available, making sure that we're supporting our localities. Multiple areas have reached out to me after my bill last year and said, this is a bill that we would support. This is a bill that we think is important. And to put this undue burden, unfunded mandate on these localities is just not fair. And so a lot of localities have requested this bill be presented again this year. This is why you have 3 of us carrying it. And so I would ask that the committee consider passing this bill. Speaking to the delegate, I have asked for that actual data about the cost. The response is it varies because some people are able to show up and they can pay those folks. Some days they are not able to show up. And so the staffing issue is also an element here of also requiring the bodies to be there to staff these locations. There's a lot of issues that go along with the early voting. There's not the checks and balances that are in place on voting day. And in order to have those checks and balances actually worked out, it requires additional staffing that the localities just are not able to do. If you were to think about a local polling precinct, there are a lot of staff that are inside making sure that everything's done correctly. If you were to go into any location for early voting, you're probably going to find a fraction of that. And so the oversight is, they're just not able to provide the same oversight to help constituents cast that ballot and to provide the resources that the constituent needs. And so again, this is a request of the localities for this bill.
If they have gone through the process and they've already voted early, and then there is a change in the ballot, that certainly can lead to some frustration. You know, I've already made that investment in that candidate, and there's some of the sand shifting underneath them. So I think that when we're talking about making it a more reasonable, aligning with the rest of what we see in the 50 states, is still make sure that the electorate is engaged, that they're following through the entire process. They do have an adequate amount of time, at least to come in for early voting in person, and still make sure they're fully armed with as much information as possible and not too early.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It constantly amazes me that we're in the Privileges and Elections Committee, and every year it seems like the only thing we don't talk about is voters and democracy. We have a debate about the logistics of debates as if those can't be moved. We have conversations about the cost of turnout of voters as if that's not worth it. We have a debate about questionable turnout statistics, which, no offense, but Georgia had one of the most important elections in the last 20 years. Of course their turnout was higher. And then we always have the scourge of localities, as if localities are more important than voters and our constituents and our citizens. And I guess I just always find it amazing. Like, let's have the debate about democracy and about voting. If you want less voting, because you want less voting, just say that. But the last thing I'll say, because I'll keep this brief, because we've had this fight every year for 4 years now, is one person said that we're an outlier among states. Yeah, and that's pretty awesome. We are. We're easy to access the ballot. When I started this gig back in 2018, we were the second hardest state to vote in. We were an outlier among states then too. I'm more proud that we're an outlier now. More states should be like us. I don't want to be like those states that are worse than us for voter access. So I would hope that we do not pass all these bills. Thank you, Mr. Chair.